Oh,
Fab.
you there?
I am.
Nice. There you go. We're back. Having technical issues these days. How you been?
Good. I've been good. You?
Yeah, good, good. Can't complain. Can't complain.
It's Fab's birthday today. Happy birthday, Fab.
Thank you. Very kind of you.
Although this podcast is timeless, it's
Timeless
still
and
Fab's
will
birthday.
probably get posted a few weeks later. So,
Okay.
well, it's definitely not getting posted today. How you been? Good. We
Very
talked about
good.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Been good. Yeah. It's
Cool.
working
You
hard.
want nice. Well, that's good. You want to talk about sales coaching, and more specifically, how to make it stick. Um, I will kind of let you set it up. I mean, sales coaching is more your thing. Yeah. What do
Yeah.
you
I
want to say
mean,
about it?
today is it's gonna be a quicker podcast. Fab's got to go eat his birthday cake at lunch. Um, I think what I want to talk about is the best way to make sales coaching stick is an important subject because a lot of people do trainings and trainings are great and but afterwards when you're coaching or when you're training even or anything you're doing, the best way to make it stick in my opinion is to make it real to the people who are experiencing the coaching.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is sometimes we have some very um, strategic or high level concepts that we want to bring about or a new attitude or a new way of working, and that's all fine and dandy when you're in the conceptual stage, but to make it practical and tactical is really what's going to help your team to put it into application. um,
Mm.
and what I really mean by that is when you're doing your role plays or when you're doing training sessions, make sure they are pertinent cases that apply to your reps reality specifically. So if you're doing a role play, do it on a real case study. Um, if you're doing some training, do it in a real case. Use real customer names. Go in there and make sure that the person can really relate to it. Now, the danger with that is that people might fall into excuses or into technical things that don't have to do with sales. But what you have
What
to
do you
do is
mean?
make sure that when you are doing the training, when you are doing the coaching, that you're focusing on the elements that are in your control, which are, I've talked about this a lot, which are your activities, so your calls, whatever you're doing, or your method. Everything else, if it's a bad economy or if operations screwed up, you're not talking about that. You're talking about the things you control and that you want to make move forward. So
Mm.
if you have that approach, it'll really help you in ensuring that it'll stick as much as possible because you're making it as realistic
Mm.
to what it is that they're doing.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I have to admit, like, you're completely right in that we've done coaching sessions together. You're the only sales coach I've had because I've never been in an official sales position before. And you're right. Like, it makes it so much more contextual when. So much more real when we can talk about like a real opportunity or role play different scenarios within a real opportunity than when it's like, you know, giant John Doe at ABC Corp looking to buy a CRM. You know what I mean? Like, it's just
Yeah.
it's a little too abstract sometimes, and human mind always goes like, yeah, it made sense in the training, right? But in my real life, like when I'm talking to Paul, and he's has Salesforce and he's not sure with you when he wants, like, that's a very different type of reality, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so I really like that idea of like taking uh, taking a real opportunity that you have or a real prospect if you're talking more to the top of the funnel. But I like that idea a lot. I think it just makes it easier. I think just that's how humans function. You're removing a lot of, like you're just saying before, removing a lot of excuse making, right?
Yeah,
Like, oh yeah, we spent 2 hours doing role playing and training and stuff like that, but I
it
still
doesn't
flubbed the
suit my
deal.
reality. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's cool. I like that. I like that a lot,
Yeah,
actually.
and the other thing too is, I mean, sometimes it's impossible, right? So if you're a sales manager of a huge company that's got 20 divisions and you're doing a training for everyone all at once, well, you might not be able to take something specific because part of your team sells a service, the other part of your team sells heavy machinery, and the other part of your team sells lubricants. Well, maybe
Mm.
you can't take a real life situation. But when you're coaching, usually it's smaller groups and sometimes even one-on-one. That's where you're really going to benefit from going into that. But there's something else I'd like to say. Sometimes when you bring about a new concept, it's good to take it out of the industry so that people see it in a totally non-biased way. So if you're bringing on
Mm.
a new concept, if you're talking about objections, for example, well, maybe when you're talking the first time about objections and you're saying that, well, you can avoid objections if you're asking enough open-ended questions at the beginning, you might give a simple example that's outside of the reality. But once, if you really want it to stick, you got to bring it into the reality eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense, right? Because I mean, again, because in your reality, like this is the opposite situation, right? Like it's not really a training; it's more an introduction on a new topic. I mean, I guess it is training, but introduction to a new topic. Um, especially for people that have been in the company or in the role for a long time, and you're all of a sudden you want to bring in like objection handling and objection handling training, and they're like, well, I don't need to do that, right? Because you're keeping it contextual to it. So when you're presenting something, bringing it from a new perspective makes sense, but then when you're training on them or coaching them, then bringing it within their reality makes
Yes,
sense.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was talking about this yesterday with the client actually, and I was saying, when you were a kid and you were in school and you did a math problem and you learned, I don't know, to do a new math formula, they would often, show you the technical aspect of the formula, and then they get you to do an exercise. And then the best way for it to stick is if they ask you to apply it in your real world. So if you're
Yeah.
doing a physics thing, if they say, well, if you're a skateboard rider, if you're riding your skateboard down a hill that's got this much of an incline, people could visualize it more. Now, in sales, it's great because you can really apply it to real world concepts, and this is what makes it stick. This is what makes people relate to it in a way that they'll be able to use it, and they'll absorb a lot more of it, because we also know that in trainings, when you're doing a training, um, people don't remember everything you say, but the more you make it to their reality, the more they will remember, and the more you make them practice, and more that you make them apply it in their world, the more they're going to remember it and make it a true, turn it into a habit, rather
Mm.
than it's just this thing that I learned that I might use. It's no, then we're going
Yeah.
to create a habit out of it so that you integrate it into your real life process.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can see that, right? Like where it's a matter of, yeah, oh yeah, right. Paul showed me how to do this on my deal with Mary, and that went really well. So now that I'm speaking with, Sophie, I'm going to try that again, right? It's so much more concrete as opposed to like, oh yeah, that one time the sales trainer came in and talked about objection handling and asking questions, but it didn't come up in our conversations, so I'm not going to do it, right? Like, but if you're being coached on how to do it specifically for one deal that you're working on, then it's easier to contextualize that and
Yes.
to apply it
Yeah.
elsewhere. Obviously, it's still practice. Like, it's not a light switch, right? It's not because you're contextualizing it that they're going to get it next day. But I think you're removing a lot of excuse making, I think, by doing that.
Yeah. And I think let's use a concrete example is when you and I have worked on the elevator pitch, if you keep it high level, you're doing the elevator pitch, you're showing people how to do it. And then when you make it, you turn it into the real world aspect. Often the conversation right from the start is, well, how do I even introduce myself?
Mm.
Well, then they can practice it. And then the best way to practice that is to do the actual role play, if you're doing an elevator pitch or a cold call or whatever it might be. And then people, then they really absorb it. But that's
Right.
when you realize that even though you've taught them a method, often people take a while to absorb the newness of it. We've
Yeah.
talked about it before, and then a perfect example is in the conversation starter. We always say that you have to, tag the prospect with an emotion.
Yeah.
Most people, when you ask them to do it originally, they can't do that. Well, it's one of the most important parts of your elevator pitch to get them to really want to be part of it. So if you
Yeah.
don't practice that with them, if you don't show them how to do it, they're never going to apply it to the full extent. Well, if you're lucky, they will, but they're most likely not going to apply it the way they should be applying it.
Yeah, no, yeah, I like that a lot, and obviously, like you're triggering my operational hat, by doing this. Like, I mean, how
That's
can I
good.
help that? So I think two things that are kind of popping to mind, and sometimes I wish we could plan these calls a bit more because then, like a week later, I'm like, I should have said that. But then I think two things. Well, one is, and maybe this is the most boring takeaway in the history of CRMs and operations, but it's keeping your CRM up to date, right? It's going to be a lot easier to find good coaching calls and good coaching situations if your CRM's up to date, right? If
Yeah.
the deals aren't in there, if the data is not in there,
Yeah.
if the objections that you've had in the past aren't in there, or whatever, it makes it really harder to contextualize everything, right? So for the rep loses out, right? They don't have their data in there, so their coaching sessions and their trainings are not as realistic or contextual as they could be.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd say too, and you and I have talked about this in the past, is that let's say you have a small team of 5 to 10 salespeople. You can even use those role plays, those well done role plays as playbook videos. So
Mm-hmm.
when you're setting up your playbook in your CRM,
Yeah,
you can tag a 2-3 minute elevator pitch. You can tag a conversation on when you're discovering the value, when you're quantifying, when you're discovering the urgency. All these things can be very tactical and realistic to your reps industry, and they'll say, oh wow, this is, oh, how do we do this again? You can
yeah.
break it down, and it becomes super helpful. You can have it as a PDF if you want, as a learning tool, or you can have it as a video tool. And I think that's totally operationalizable. Wow, is that the
Mm-hmm.
right word? No.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is HubSpot has this functionality called playlists where you can kind of like save playlists of great calls or segments of calls, right? And I think because that can't get more contextual than that, right?
Wow.
Where a rep can then go in like discovery, this is my discovery
Yeah.
playlist, and you're listening to like either full discovery calls if you feel the
Wow.
whole thing went really well, or
Okay.
just a segment. This was a great opener, let's say, and you
Right.
have like two, three great openers, and then you have
Oh,
like
I
two,
love
three.
that tab. I didn't know that. That's an amazing feature. So you're
Yeah,
saying you could have a playlist of like 10 or 15 opening calls, and you just go listen to them, and
yeah,
you can tag that in. Oh wow, that's amazing. Now, do you
yeah.
use the fancy version of HubSpot to do?
Why? Because you want to do it.
Yeah.
It's definitely available in Pro and above. I don't know if it's available in
Wow,
Starter.
that's awesome. I love
Yeah,
that tab. That's really
yeah.
good.
I really like the component where you can really snip out a part of the call, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes, a whole call then becomes, it's kind of maybe the reverse even of what we're saying, right? The whole call is like, well, that made sense in that call that Paul
Yeah.
did 6 weeks ago. But if you're taking just a snippet, right? Like, oh man, Paul, I really liked how you opened that call up. Or,
Yeah.
Paul, I really liked how you add that, handle that objection or whatever. And you snip
Yeah.
that and you just have that as
You
part of
take
the
those,
playlist.
yeah, you take those snips. You take the objection handling one and you put it in your objection portion of your CRM, or how to handle objections. You
Yeah.
take the opening call, you put it for your conversation starter. Great discovery questions. You can put those in the discovery portion, but that's good because you've got different examples, different styles,
Yeah.
but they're all relatable to real life situations. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, so that's a functionality that I find is definitely it's underutilized. I think it's hard for sales managers
Yeah.
to take the time to like snip the calls and listen to everything, and but I think if you have like a sales ops person that can help you with that,
Yeah.
that's definitely an underrated functionality,
Yeah.
especially if you have larger teams. Obviously
I
if
didn't
you're
even
dealing
know
with one
about
or two reps, yeah, if you have one or two reps, it's easier to do one-on-one stuff. But if you have larger
it.
teams, it's great. Like, okay, they know they have a discovery call coming up this afternoon. They could just listen
Yeah.
to the discovery playlist, sorry, and on they go, and
Yeah.
they're ready to get going.
Yeah, that's great. So, hey, look, if we were to wrap this up,
Yep.
we're doing a quick and dirty one today. Well, not dirty, sorry, a quick and efficient one. Um, my takeaway is, of course, the best way to make sales coaching stick is to make it realistic to the rep's reality. But I have a second takeaway from what you just said is if you use your CRM properly, you can operationalize this so that people have these takeaways. So that people have these realistic playlists to different stages of their CRM they can plug in there. To me, that's fantastic, and not just one example, but many examples, of
Yeah,
different styles within your industry, within your company, of people who do things in a certain way that makes sense.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, we've said this before. Your CRM is your friend and your assistant and your advisor. And I think if you the more up to date it is, and the more you explore the different tools, the more it'll work for you.
yeah,
It'll add value beyond just tracking forecasts and stuff like that. It'll definitely become an advisor. So there you
absolutely. And I've often used that line that I think comes straight from you is that, a good CRM is a sales assistant. It's an
go. Yeah,
advisor, and
yeah.
it can help you at so many levels. And true that. Um,
Yeah, I mean, and then maybe this is a topic for another day. Like that's why I always tell people, like, or I try to tell people, like, your CRM and whether that includes, and should include marketing and service as well in there, it's a process. It's not a project. You don't set up a CRM and it's done. If there's always ways to improve and make sure that your data is legit and identify insights that'll help your team close, and you could dive deeper and deeper and deeper, and I think that's why to me, like, it's a process. It's not a project.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Fab. So you should always be tweaking it, making it better. It's alive. It's also getting better and adjusting to the needs that you have as you go along. That's a really good point. Yes, let's pick that up in another podcast because I think that could be a podcast in and of its own. Maybe next week.
Awesome. Now we know what we'll talk about next week.
All right.
All right, Paul, this was fun.
Thanks, Fab. Happy birthday again.
Thank you. Take care.
Talk to you soon. Bye bye.
Bye.